The doors of Balmoral have never seen anything like this. A royal taking another royal's son to court over a castle that holds the soul of a dead queen. The princess is not blinking. The castle that belongs to the crown. There are places in this world that are more than buildings, more than stone, timber, and glass, more than acreage measured on a map. Places that hold memory, grief, and carry the weight of an entire nation's history inside their walls. Balmoral Castle is one of those places. And what is happening there right now is unlike anything the British royal family has ever been forced to confront in public. Sit with that for a moment. This is not a dispute over money. It is not a feud over titles, public appearances, or who sits where at a state banquet. This is a battle over something far more sacred. Something the royal family has protected for over 170 years. Something that, until now, was never supposed to end up inside a courtroom.
It's been a bit of a shock.
Do you worry about Republic coming and shouting things
Everyone has a right to think what they want.
To understand why the princess has done what she has done, you first have to understand what Balmoral actually is. Not the postcard version. Not the version the palace releases in carefully curated photographs every summer. The real version. The version that lives in the bones of every senior royal who has ever walked its grounds. Balmoral Castle sits in the Scottish Highlands, in the valley of the River Dee in Aberdeenshire. It covers 53,680 acres of some of the most breathtaking, unforgiving, and achingly private land in all of Britain. Ancient forests, rolling moorland, rivers that run cold and clear even in summer, hills that disappear into low cloud on gray mornings. It is a place that demands silence, and silence inside those walls has always been respected. Prince Albert purchased the estate in 1852 for Queen Victoria. He saw something in those Scottish hills that he believed his wife needed: privacy, peace, distance from the relentless machinery of the monarchy. Victoria fell in love with it immediately. She called it her dear paradise. And from that moment forward, Balmoral became something deeply personal to the royal family. Something that belonged not to the state, to the crown estate, or to Parliament. It belonged to them. Privately, personally, irreversibly. That distinction matters enormously. And it is at the very heart of what the princess is now fighting to protect. Unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, Balmoral is not public property. It is not administered by government committees or managed by state officials. It is a private estate, passed down from monarch to monarch through personal inheritance. Queen Victoria left it to King Edward VII. It moved through the generations. King George V, King George VI, and then it passed to Queen Elizabeth II, who inherited it from her father in 1952, the same year she ascended the throne. For 70 years, Balmoral was Elizabeth's sanctuary. 70 years! She went there every summer without exception. She walked those hills in green wellies and a headscarf and fished in the River Dee. She entertained prime ministers in her drawing rooms and sent them away with a clearer sense of what the monarchy expected from the government. She photographed its landscapes. Balmoral was where she hosted her grandchildren and watched them discover, as she had discovered, what it felt like to belong to something ancient and permanent. It was at Balmoral that she drew her final breath. On the 8th of September, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died in the castle she had loved more than almost any place on earth. The flags came down. The world wept. And Balmoral, in that moment, became something even more sacred than it had been before. It became the place where the longest reigning monarch in British history took her leave of the world. You do not use a place like that without permission. You do not walk into those rooms and treat them as your own when they are not. Neither do you make decisions about a private royal estate that is not yours to make decisions about, especially when the woman who loved it most is barely cold in her grave, and her family is still carrying the grief of losing her, unless you are prepared for the consequences. And the consequences, as the Queen Consort's son is now discovering, are severe. When Queen Elizabeth died, Balmoral passed to the king. As privately owned royal property, it transferred automatically and in its entirety. The king became its new custodian, and with that custodianship came absolute authority over who uses the estate, when they use it, and under what conditions they may be there. Those rules are not suggestions. They are not guidelines open to interpretation. Inside the royal family, the private estates operate under a code of conduct so deeply embedded in tradition that it rarely needs to be written down. Everyone who belongs to that world understands. You ask, you receive permission, then you respect the space, and you leave it exactly as you found it. That code has existed for generations. It existed when the estate belonged to Victoria, to George VI, and to Elizabeth, and it exists now under the current king. The name above the door changes, the code does not, which is precisely why what happened at Balmoral sent shockwaves through the inner circle of the royal family the moment it came to light, because someone had walked through those doors without asking. Someone had used that space as though it belonged to them. Someone had looked at the most private, sacred, and emotionally loaded estate in the entire royal portfolio and decided that the rules did not apply to them. The princess found out. And the princess, as anyone who has ever underestimated her will tell you, does not let things go. She is her mother's daughter in every way that counts. She carries the same steel, the same unflinching sense of duty. She has the same absolute conviction that the institutions she has devoted her life to protecting are worth fighting for, regardless of who stands on the other side. She looked at what had happened at Balmoral and at who was responsible. She considered what it meant for the estate, the family, and the memory of her mother. And then she picked up the phone and called her lawyers. What the Queen Consort's son did inside Balmoral and how the princess discovered it is a story that the palace would have given almost anything to keep quiet. They did not succeed. What the Queen Consort's son did. There is a particular kind of audacity that only comes from believing you are untouchable, from believing that the rules which govern ordinary people, and even extraordinary people, simply do not apply to you, that your position, connections, and your proximity to power create a kind of invisible shield, one that will hold no matter what you do, no matter how far you push, and whose territory you walk into uninvited. The consort's son believed he was untouchable. He was wrong. To understand what happened at Balmoral, you have to understand who he is, because he is not simply the Queen Consort's son. He is not simply a man who grew up on the edges of royal life and absorbed its privileges without fully absorbing its responsibilities. He is a man who has spent decades cultivating a public identity built on taste, refinement, and access. Food writer, author, television personality. A man who moves through the highest rooms in Britain with the easy confidence of someone who has never once been told he does not belong. That confidence, sources close to the royal family now suggest, is precisely what led him here. The story begins in the autumn of 2023. Balmoral had passed to the king just over a year before. The estate was still carrying the weight of Queen Elizabeth's death. The staff who had served her for decades were still adjusting to a world in which she was no longer at the center of it. The rooms still held her presence in the way that rooms do when someone beloved has recently departed, quietly, heavily, in a way that those who loved her could feel the moment they crossed the threshold. It was in this atmosphere that the consort's son made his move. He accessed Balmoral on at least 2 separate occasions during this period without obtaining the formal permission required from the estate's custodians. He did not go through the official channels, nor did he make a formal request to the palace administrators who manage access to the private royal estates. He did not seek written authorization from the king or from any senior member of the royal household with the authority to grant it. He simply arrived, and it was not a brief visit. It was not a passing moment of poor judgment that could be explained away as a misunderstanding. Sources indicate that he made use of the estate's private facilities over an extended period, the castle's interior rooms. He made use of the grounds and the staff quarters that are reserved exclusively for authorized guests of the royal family, spaces that are considered deeply private. spaces that carry restrictions so well understood within royal circles that breaching them is not an accident, it is a choice. But that was not the full extent of it. What made the situation considerably more serious and ultimately made it impossible to contain within the usual walls of palace discretion was what he reportedly did during those visits. Sources close to the investigation suggest that he used Balmoral not as a private retreat, but as a venue for activities that had no authorization whatsoever from the estate's rightful custodians. Meetings were held, guests were brought onto the grounds, individuals with no royal connection, official clearance, or business being inside one of the most private estates in Britain were reportedly welcomed through those ancient doors as though he had the right to extend that welcome. He did not have that right, not even close. The private royal estates operate under protocols that have been refined over generations. Because the royals understand what happens when those boundaries are not enforced, Balmoral, in particular, given its status as a personal inheritance rather than a crown property, carries restrictions that go beyond even those applied to Sandringham or Windsor. Access is controlled, guest lists are scrutinized, every visit is logged, every presence on the grounds is accounted for, which is how it was discovered. The estate's senior staff is fiercely loyal to the memory of Queen Elizabeth, and deeply attuned to any irregularity in the rhythms of the castle they had served for years. Noticed something was wrong. The signs were there, small at first, then impossible to ignore. Rooms that should have been closed were showing signs of use. Logs that should have been empty carried unexplained entries. Staff reported encounters with individuals they did not recognize and had not been briefed to expect. The information moved quietly but quickly through the channels that matter inside the royal world. It reached the princess. Now, here is where you need to understand something important. In the immediate aftermath of Queen Elizabeth's death, it was understood within the family that Balmoral would be treated with particular sensitivity. It was not simply an inheritance, it was a memorial, an ongoing act of respect for the woman who had loved it above almost everywhere else on earth. Senior royals had privately agreed, without needing to put it in writing, that the estate would be approached with reverence during the period of mourning and transition. The consort's son reportedly knew this. He had been present at enough family gatherings and private conversations. He had enough of the quiet understandings that pass between people in that world to know exactly what Balmoral represented and exactly what was expected of those granted access to it, and he proceeded anyway. Sources say that when the full picture of what had occurred began to emerge, the reaction inside the inner royal circle was not simply one of anger. It was something colder than anger, something more precise. It was the particular fury that comes from watching someone treat a sacred thing carelessly, from watching someone look at a place your family has bled for, grieved in, and loved for over 170 years, and decide that their convenience matters more than its dignity. There were those in the palace who counseled caution. There always are. The instinct within royal institutions is always to manage quietly, to contain, to resolve things through back channels, private conversations, and the kind of firm but deniable pressure that leaves no public record. The princess listened to those voices, and then she set them aside, because there is a point at which quiet management becomes complicity. There is a point at which protecting the institution means refusing to let a violation of it go unanswered, a point at which the only language that carries sufficient weight is the language of the law. The princess reached that point, and the moment she did, everything changed. What drove her to that decision, and what it reveals about who she truly is a story that the royal family did not expect to become public, but it has. The princess steps forward. There is a reason the British public has always trusted the princess above almost every other member of the royal family. It is not her title or her proximity to the throne, nor is it the carefully managed public image that the palace machinery produces for most senior royals. It is something far simpler and far rarer than any of those things. The act that she means what she says, every single time. She was born on the 15th of August, 1950. The second child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, she grew up inside the most scrutinized family on earth, and somehow emerge from it with something that the institution rarely produces: an unshakable, unperformable, completely authentic sense of self. She does not play games. She does not speak in the careful cushioned language of palace diplomacy when direct words will serve better. She does not smile at things that deserve to be confronted. And she does not walk away from a fight simply because the fight is uncomfortable. Those who know her well describe her in remarkably consistent terms: formidable, precise, loyal to a fault when loyalty is deserved, and utterly unmovable when she has decided that something is wrong. She has decided that something is wrong. To understand why she is the one leading this charge, you have to understand her relationship with Balmoral, because it is not simply the relationship of a royal with a family estate. It is something deeper, something that goes back to the earliest years of her life, something that the death of her mother transformed into a responsibility she takes more seriously than almost anything else she carries. She spent her childhood summers at Balmoral. She learned to ride on its grounds. She walked the moorland with her father, a man whose own relationship with the outdoors shaped him as profoundly as any of the royal duties he performed. She sat with her mother in the early mornings, when the mist was still low over the hills, the castle was quiet, and the world outside had not yet begun to press in on them. Those memories are not abstract to her. They are not the kind of soft nostalgia that fades with time. They are vivid and physical. They are written into her body the way that formative places always are. Balmoral is not a building for the princess. It is her mother and father. It is the version of her family that existed before the world got hold of them and turned them into symbols. And someone walked into it without asking. When the information about the consort's son reached her, those close to her say she did not raise her voice. That is not her way. She does not perform outrage, nor does she make declarations designed to signal her feelings to a room. She listened. She asked precise and pointed questions and waited until she had the full picture in front of her, and then she acted. But her decision to step forward must also be understood in the context of something larger, something that has been building inside the royal family since the moment a long-known companion became queen consort, because the princess and the queen consort have never occupied comfortable territory with each other. Let that sit for a moment. The history between these two women is long. It is layered, and it has never been fully resolved beneath the surface of the public civility they maintain at official engagements. She watched her brother's first marriage collapse in the most public and painful way imaginable. She watched his first wife suffer. She watched her mother carry the weight of that suffering with a dignity that cost Elizabeth more than the public ever knew. And she watched the woman who later became queen consort move, slowly and steadily, from the shadows into the center of the royal family's life. She accepted that. She is pragmatic above all things. She understood that her brother's happiness mattered and that the monarchy required stability. She made her peace with the situation, the way that disciplined, duty-driven people make peace with things they cannot change. But making peace with the queen consort is one thing. Extending that peace to the queen consort's son is another matter entirely. He has never held a royal title. He has never taken on royal duties. He has never made the sacrifices that come with belonging fully to that world. He exists in a particular and comfortable middle space, close enough to the crown to enjoy its warmth, far enough from its responsibilities to avoid its weight. He attends the gatherings. He moves through the rooms and carries the reflected prestige of his mother's position without carrying any of its obligations. And now, sources suggest, he apparently believed that reflected prestige extended to Balmoral. The princess did not agree. There is something else driving her that goes beyond personal history and beyond the specific details of what he did. Something that speaks to the very core of who she is as a royal and as a woman, shaped by decades of service. She has given more to the institution of the monarchy than almost any other member of the family. She carries out more public engagements than any other senior royal. She has done so for decades with minimal complaint and maximum efficiency. She does not seek the spotlight or public validation. She shows up and does the work. She honors the commitments that come with her position because she believes. With a conviction that borders on the sacred, that duty is not optional. That conviction is what makes the violation of Balmoral so personally intolerable to her. Because if duty is not optional for those who are born into this family, it is certainly not optional for those who have merely married into it. And it is absolutely not optional for those who enjoy the benefits of proximity to the crown without bearing any of its formal responsibilities. The consort's son used Balmoral as though the rules did not apply to him. The princess has spent her entire life proving, quietly and consistently, and without fanfare, that the rules apply to everyone. The collision between those two positions was always going to be explosive. It happened on a gray morning in early 2024. She received a detailed briefing from the estate's senior administrator. The briefing laid out the full sequence of events, the visits, unauthorized guests, and the use of restricted facilities, the complete absence of any formal request for permission. She read every word and set the document down on the desk in front of her. She picked up the phone. Not to call the queen consort or the king, not to seek counsel from the palace advisors who would inevitably recommend caution, discretion, and the path of least resistance. She called her lawyers, and from that moment, the matter was no longer a family problem to be managed behind closed doors. It was a legal matter, with consequences and a courtroom. With a day of reckoning that no amount of royal influence or maternal protection could prevent. The consort's son was about to discover what it means to cross a line in front of a woman who has spent her entire life defending them. What happened when the legal proceedings began and how the palace scrambled to contain the fallout is a story that changes everything. The courtroom and the crown. There are things the British royal family will do almost anything to avoid. Public scandal is one. Open family conflict is another. But above both of those, above almost every other institutional fear the palace carries, is this: a courtroom. Because a courtroom has no loyalty to anyone. It does not care about titles, bloodlines, or the carefully constructed image of a family that has spent centuries presenting itself as the moral backbone of a nation. A courtroom demands one thing and one thing only: the truth. When the princess instructed her legal team to proceed with formal action against the consort's son, the palace response was immediate. Alarm, followed by urgent and quiet pressure to make the whole thing disappear before it reached public consciousness. Senior courtiers reached out through back channels. The machinery of palace damage control began to move with practiced efficiency. It moved too slowly. She had anticipated every attempt to pull her back. She had heard the arguments before the people making them finished forming the sentences. Think of the institution. Think of the king and what this does to the family. She weighed each argument with the cold precision of a woman who has spent more than 7 decades understanding exactly what the monarchy requires. Her conclusion was firm. The institution was precisely why she was proceeding. The legal proceedings were filed in the spring of 2024. The claim was specific and unambiguous: unauthorized access to a private royal estate, breach of established protocols governing use of the property. The filing named the consort's son explicitly, cited the specific occasions of unauthorized entry, and referenced the presence of uncleared individuals on restricted grounds. The document was precise, detailed, devastating. He retained legal counsel within days. His team advanced a position built on one central argument: that his mother's status as queen consort granted him implicit access rights to Balmoral as part of the extended royal family. It was a bold argument. It was also a catastrophically miscalculated one, because the moment that position was formally advanced, it opened implications that the palace had absolutely no interest in entertaining. The suggestion that adult children of a queen consort carry inherent entitlements to private royal estates was something every legal advisor in royal Britain understood to be completely untenable. Her legal team dismantled it without ceremony. Estate logs were produced. Access records were placed before the court with forensic clarity. The complete absence of any formal request, written authorization, or any communication through the official channels that exist for precisely this purpose was documented and presented without ambiguity. The Queen Consort's position throughout was one of the most closely watched aspects of the entire situation. Sources describe her as privately devastated, not simply by the legal proceedings, but by the speed with which a family matter became a public one. Every public appearance during this period was calibrated to project composure and normality. Behind that image, sources say, nothing was normal. The king found himself in a position of almost unbearable difficulty. His sister on one side, his wife's son on the other side. Those close to him say he did not move to stop the proceedings. That silence was its own answer.
No.
The court date arrived. The consort's son walked into that building carrying the weight of a name that had always opened doors. Inside that courtroom, the estate records, the access logs, and the complete absence of any authorization spoke with a clarity that no argument could soften. The princess had not just taken the consort's son to court. She had sent a message to everyone watching. And everyone was watching. What this means. For the monarchy, some battles are about the thing in front of you, and some battles are about everything behind it. What the princess did by taking the consort's son to court was not simply about Balmoral. It was not simply about unauthorized access, breached protocols, or the presence of uncleared guests on restricted grounds. Those things mattered. They were the legal substance of the case, but the deeper meaning of what she did, the thing that will echo through the corridors of royal power long after the courtroom proceedings have concluded, is something far more significant. She drew a line, and she made certain that everyone saw exactly where it fell. The British monarchy is currently going through one of the most complex and consequential transitions in its modern history. The king is older, his health has been fragile and publicly acknowledged as such, and the heir is steadily and deliberately moving from the position of heir into something closer to active authority. The center of gravity inside the palace has been shifting, quietly but unmistakably for some time now. And in the middle of that shift, there have been questions about boundaries, about who belongs where and what proximity to power actually entitles a person to, has never been more urgent. The consort's son is not a working royal. He holds no title connected to the crown and carries no formal responsibilities to the institution. He exists, as he always has, in that comfortable space between the royal world and the civilian one, close enough to feel the warmth of the flame, far enough to avoid being burned by its demands. What her legal action establishes, with the full weight of a courtroom behind it, is that comfortable middle space has limits. The private estates of the royal family are not social amenities extended informally to those who happen to have the right surname in their family tree. The rules which govern access to places like Balmoral apply to everyone without exception, regardless of who their mother married. That is not a small statement. It is a constitutional one, because the precedent set here will shape how the royal family manages its private holdings for years to come. Every person who exists on the edges of that world, extended family member and adult child of a consort, is now looking at what happened to the consort's son and recalibrating. The message is clear, unambiguous, delivered not in a private letter or a carefully worded palace statement, but in the most public and permanent form available. You do not use what is not yours. For the Queen Consort, the implications are deeply personal and impossible to separate from her role. Her son has been taken to court by the king's sister, over the king's estate. The triangulation of that situation is as uncomfortable as anything the modern monarchy has produced. Sources close to the Queen Consort suggest she understands, with painful clarity, that her position did not protect her son, that the crown she wears does not extend its shelter to her children in the way she perhaps believed it did. That realization has changed something between the Queen Consort and the princess that may not be changeable back. For the heir, watching all of this unfold from a position of growing authority, the lesson is one he did not need to be taught, but will not forget. Boundaries matter. Enforcement matters. An institution that fails to defend its own private spaces against casual violation by those who feel entitled will eventually fail to defend itself against larger threats. The princess understood that before anyone else in the family was willing to say it out loud, and Balmoral itself. That ancient castle sitting in 53,000 acres of Scottish Highland, silence. The place where Elizabeth walked her dogs in the early morning light. The place where she fished, photographed, hosted, and ultimately died. It stands exactly as it always has, unchanged by the legal storm that broke around it. But something has shifted in how the royal family will protect it going forward. The princess made sure of that. She always does. Balmoral still stands, cold, silent, immovable. A castle that has absorbed the grief, secrets, and quiet power struggles of the most scrutinized family on earth. But the royal family that guards it has changed forever. The princess drew a line in the most public way possible, in court, in the presence of the watching world that had never seen anything like it. And nobody inside those palace walls will ever forget what it means to cross her. Not the consort's son, the queen consort, or the courtiers who counseled caution and got ignored. She left a mark. The message has been delivered and the precedent has been set. The next person who walks through those doors without permission will do so knowing exactly what is waiting on the other side.